Keth stood on the bridge of the Vorthak warship as it moved through space toward another world to conquer. He had done this many times before. His job was simple: find new planets, study the people who lived there, report back to his commanders about how easy it would be to take over their world. The Vorthak Empire had taken control of 17 star systems already. They were very good at this. They had the best ships. They had the strongest weapons. Most important of all, they had removed fear from their minds long ago. Fear made soldiers weak. Fear made people run away instead of fight. The Vorthak did not feel fear anymore. Keth looked at the data files on his screen. The next planet was called Earth by the people who lived there. The creatures were called humans. They walked on two legs like many other species the Vorthak had conquered. They had recently learned how to travel between stars, but their technology was still very basic. According to the reports, humans used metal ships with simple engines. Their weapons shot pieces of metal or used old chemical explosives. Some of their weapons used energy from splitting atoms, but even these were weak compared to Vorthak plasma cannons. The humans had no shields that could stop Vorthak weapons. Their armor was thin metal that would melt under the heat of Vorthak energy beams. The tactical computer showed that one Vorthak battlecruiser should be enough to make the entire planet surrender. Most worlds gave up as soon as they saw what Vorthak ships could do. The smart ones surrendered before any fighting started. The foolish ones tried to resist for a few days before they realized they could not win. Keth had watched many conquests. The Kalari people had beautiful crystal cities that caught light from their sun and made rainbow patterns across their world. When the Vorthak fleet arrived, the Kalari sent messages begging for mercy. They offered to give the Vorthak anything they wanted if they would leave their cities alone. The Vorthak took their planet in 3 days. The Nethrim were gas creatures who lived in the clouds of their world. They were very intelligent and had built amazing floating cities that drifted through their thick atmosphere. But when Vorthak ships appeared in their sky, the Nethrim became so afraid that they could not think clearly. They made mistakes. They crashed their own ships trying to escape. The Vorthak conquered them in less than 1 day. The Zarian warriors were different. They had 4 arms and natural armor that covered their bodies like thick shells. They were born fighters who loved battle, but even they could not stand against Vorthak technology. Their courage lasted only until they saw their strongest weapons bounce off Vorthak shield barriers. After that, they fought desperately but without hope. The war was over in 2 weeks. Every species felt fear when they saw the Vorthak fleet. Some showed it by running away. Others showed it by begging for mercy. A few showed it by fighting harder but making stupid mistakes because they were too scared to think clearly. Fear always made the enemy weaker. It made conquest easier. Keth did not understand fear himself. No Vorthak did. Their scientists had changed their minds many generations ago to remove this emotion. Fear was for weak creatures who had not evolved beyond their animal instincts. The Vorthak were better than that. They felt determination when they went into battle. They felt satisfaction when they won. They felt pride in their superior technology and tactics. But they never felt the terror that paralyzed other species. This made Keth very good at his job. When he studied enemy behavior, he could watch them panic without being affected by it himself. He could analyze their fear responses like a scientist studying insects. He understood that fear made creatures do predictable things. They either ran away, froze in place, or attacked wildly without thinking. All of these responses made them easy to defeat. The ship's computer beeped softly to tell him they were getting close to the human star system. Keth pulled up more detailed information about Earth and its people. The planet had large oceans and several big continents. Most humans lived in huge cities near the water. They had divided their world into many different nations that often fought with each other. This was good news for the Vorthak. Divided enemies were always easier to conquer than united ones. The humans would probably spend time arguing with each other about how to respond to the Vorthak threat, instead of working together. Some nations might even try to make deals with the Vorthak to protect themselves while other humans were being conquered. The humans had wars among themselves all the time. Keth read reports about their conflicts with interest. They fought over territory, resources, and ideas. Sometimes they fought simply because they belonged to different groups and did not like each other. This showed that humans were an aggressive species, but their aggression was not organized or smart. Human weapons were designed to kill other humans, not to fight space battles against advanced aliens. Their missiles could destroy cities on their own planet. but they would barely scratch the hull of a Vorthak cruiser. Their fighter aircraft were fast compared to other human vehicles, but they were slow compared to Vorthak interceptors. Human ground forces used projectile, weapons and chemical explosives that would be useless against Vorthak battle armor. The most advanced human technology came from studying crashed alien ships that had visited their planet in the past, but the aliens who had crashed on Earth were from primitive species that the Vorthak had conquered long ago. The humans were trying to copy technology that was already outdated by hundreds of years. Commander Throck walked over to Keth's station. Throck was a veteran of many conquests who had earned his rank through successful campaigns against difficult enemies. He was tall even for a Vorthak, with the pale gray skin and black eyes that marked their species. His uniform showed medals from 12 different conquered worlds. "What do you think of these humans?" Throck asked as he looked at the data on Keth's screen. Keth gestured toward the tactical analysis. "They should be easy to defeat, Commander. Their technology is primitive. Their forces are divided. They have never fought a real space war before. One battle cruiser should be sufficient to force their surrender." Throck nodded approvingly. "Good. We will follow standard procedure. Jump into their orbital space. Broadcast surrender terms. Give them time to see our superior firepower. Most species submit immediately when they realize they cannot win." "And if they refuse to surrender?" Keth asked, though he already knew the answer. "Then we demonstrate our weapons on a military target. After they see what our plasma cannons can do to their ships, they will reconsider their decision." No species has ever continued fighting after seeing their best defenses destroyed in seconds. Keth agreed with this assessment. It was logical and based on extensive experience. The Vorthak had conquered so many worlds using this exact method that it had become routine. Show overwhelming force. Offer terms. Accept surrender. Move on to the next target. The ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the human solar system. Sensors immediately began scanning for human ships and defensive positions. The results matched what their intelligence had predicted. A few space stations orbited the inner planets. Some communication satellites circled Earth itself. Several primitive spacecraft moved between the planets, apparently carrying cargo or passengers. None of these vessels appeared to be military ships. The humans had not even tried to build a defensive fleet to protect their homeworld. This was either very smart or very foolish. Smart if they realized they could not fight the Vorthak and were preparing to surrender. Foolish if they thought the Vorthak would show mercy to an undefended world. "Take us to Earth," Commander Throck ordered. "It is time to add another planet to our empire." Keth watched the blue and white world grow larger on the main screen as they approached. Soon they would find out whether these humans were smart enough to surrender quickly or foolish enough to resist uselessly. Either way, the outcome was certain. Earth would belong to the Vorthak Empire before the day was over. He had no idea that everything he believed about conquest and fear was about to change forever. The Vorthak battlecruiser Dominator moved into orbit around Earth. Keth watched from his station as the massive ship positioned itself above the largest human continent. The ship was 3 kilometers long and armed with enough firepower to destroy entire cities. Its black hull gleamed with energy shields that could stop any weapon the humans might have. Commander Throck stood in the center of the bridge with his hands clasped behind his back. He had done this many times before and expected the same result as always. The humans would see their ship, realize they could not fight it, and surrender within hours. "Open communication channels to all human governments," Throck commanded. "Broadcast our standard surrender message in their primary languages." The communications officer activated the transmission array. The message went out across Earth in dozens of different human languages. It was simple and direct. The Vorthak Empire now claimed this world. All human military forces must stand down immediately. All human governments must prepare to transfer authority to Vorthak administrators. Any resistance would result in the destruction of major population centers. The message included video showing what had happened to other worlds that had tried to resist. Cities turned to glass by plasma bombardment, fleets reduced to debris in space, millions of beings killed or enslaved. The evidence was clear. Resistance was futile. Keth monitored human communication channels to observe their response. He expected to see panic, confusion, and rapid surrender negotiations. Instead, he saw something completely unexpected. The humans were excited. Military bases around the planet suddenly came alive with activity. Soldiers ran to battle stations. Pilots climbed into aircraft. Ships left ports and headed toward defensive positions. But this was not the desperate scrambling of a terrified population. The humans moved with purpose and coordination that suggested they had been preparing for this moment. "Commander," Keth said, his voice uncertain. The human military response is unusual. They appear to be mobilizing for combat rather than preparing to surrender. Throck turned to look at the tactical display. Across Earth's surface, military installations that had appeared dormant were suddenly revealing hidden capabilities. Underground hangars opened to release fighter aircraft. Civilian buildings transformed as hidden weapon systems emerged from their rooftops. Orbital defense platforms that their sensors had missed began powering up and targeting the Dominator. "Perhaps they do not understand our message," Throck said. "Or they are testing our resolve. Fire a warning shot across their largest city. Show them what our weapons can do." The weapons officer charged the main plasma cannon and fired a single blast that streaked past the human city called New York. The cone beamed past harmlessly through the atmosphere but left a trail of ionized particles that glowed bright blue against the sky. Any species with basic scientific knowledge would understand that the same beam could have destroyed their entire metropolitan area. Instead of fear, the humans broadcast a response that made Keth question his understanding of intelligent behavior. "This is Admiral Park of the Earth Defense Force," came a transmission from the planet's surface. "We have been waiting for you. Let's see what you've got waiting for them." The words made no sense. How could a primitive species that had never encountered aliens before be waiting for an invasion? Keth checked his files again to make sure they had the right planet. The data confirmed this was Earth, home to humans, a species that had achieved faster-than-light travel only decades ago. "Sir," the communications officer reported, "we are receiving multiple transmissions from human military commanders. They are not requesting surrender terms. They appear to be issuing challenges." Throck's gray face darkened with confusion and anger. No species had ever responded to Vorthak intimidation with challenges. The humans were either completely insane or they possessed hidden capabilities that Vorthak intelligence had missed. "Show me their fleet positions," Throck demanded. The tactical display updated to show human vessels throughout their solar system. What had appeared to be cargo ships and passenger transports were now revealing themselves to be military vessels in disguise. Hidden weapon ports opened along their hulls. Their engines flared brighter as they accelerated toward combat positions. More concerning was the number of ships. Human space traffic had seemed light during their approach, suggesting a small and peaceful civilization. Now sensors detected hundreds of vessels emerging from hiding places throughout the system. They had been concealed inside asteroid fields, behind moons, and even within the rings of the outer planets. How did our intelligence miss this? Keth wondered aloud. The answer came from an unexpected source. A human transmission directed specifically at their ship, somehow penetrating their secure communication systems. "This is Captain Lee of the human vessel Indomitable," the voice said in perfect Vorthak language. "We know you can understand us. We have been studying your technology for over 50 years. Ever since we recovered wreckage from your war with the Kalari, we know your weapons. We know your tactics. We know your weaknesses." Keth felt something strange happen in his mind, a flutter of uncertainty that had never existed before. The humans had been studying them. They knew Vorthak capabilities and had spent decades preparing for this encounter. This was not a primitive species caught by surprise. This was a trap, impossible, Throck said. Our war with the Kalari was conducted far from this system. How could humans have recovered our technology? The answer came in the form of action rather than words. Human ships throughout the system opened fire simultaneously, not at the Dominator, which was protected by powerful shields, but at specific components that Lee had mentioned. Their weapons were crude by Vorthak standards, but they were aimed with precision that suggested intimate knowledge of Vorthak ship design. Nuclear warheads modified with alien technology struck the Dominator's sensor arrays. Chemical rockets carrying electromagnetic pulse devices targeted the communication systems. Even more disturbing, some human weapons seemed designed specifically to disrupt Vorthak shield frequencies. The mighty battle cruiser shuddered under impacts that should have been harmless. Damage reports flooded in from across the ship. The humans had found ways to hurt them that no other species had discovered. Shields holding at 80%, the defense officer reported, but they are targeting our weak points with unusual accuracy. Keth watched his tactical display with growing amazement and something else he could not identify. The humans were not fighting like any species he had studied. They were not running in panic or making desperate last stands. They were fighting like they expected to win. A squadron of human fighters approached the Dominator in a formation that seemed suicidal. Their ships were tiny compared to the massive cruiser, and their weapons could barely scratch its armor. Any rational species would keep their fighters at safe distance and use them for reconnaissance. Instead, the human pilots flew directly at the Vorthak ship's weapon turrets. Their leader, a pilot who identified himself as Major Kim, broadcast his intentions on an open channel. All fighters, target the plasma cannon housings. Ramming speed. For Earth, ramming speed. The humans were going to crash their ships into Vorthak weapons deliberately. It was a tactic so wasteful and desperate that no military academy in the galaxy taught defenses against it. Who would throw away trained pilots and expensive equipment for minimal tactical gain? The first human fighter slammed into a plasma turret at full speed. The explosion was small compared to the size of the Dominator, but it knocked the weapon offline. A second fighter hit another turret. Then a third. Deploy point defense systems, Throck ordered. Destroy those fighters before they reach us. The Dominator's defensive weapons opened fire, filling space around the ship with energy beams and projectiles. Most of the human fighters were destroyed before they could complete their attack runs, but enough survived to damage several more weapon systems. Major Kim's fighter was hit by 3 different defensive weapons but somehow kept flying. His ship was barely holding together, leaking atmosphere and trailing debris, but he continued his attack. At the last second, he transmitted a final message. "Tell my daughter I kept my promise." His fighter struck the Dominator's main communications array and exploded. The blast sent shockwaves through the ship's hull and knocked out their primary contact with Vorthak Command. Keth stared at the wreckage floating outside their hull. Kim had sacrificed his life to damage one communication system. The tactical value was minimal. The ship had backup systems that would restore communications within hours. But something about the pilot's final words disturbed Keth in a way he could not explain. The man had died for his daughter. For his planet. For his species. He had flown into certain death not because he was afraid, but because he believed his sacrifice would help others. "Sir," the weapons officer called out. More human ships approaching from multiple vectors. They appear to be cargo vessels, but sensors detect unusual energy signatures. On the screen, Keth watched a new wave of human ships approach the Dominator. These were not sleek military vessels, but converted civilian craft. Mining ships, cargo haulers, even passenger transports. All of them heading directly toward the Vorthak cruiser with obvious hostile intent. The converted human cargo ships reached the Dominator and did something that made Keth question everything he knew about space combat. Instead of firing their weapons from a safe distance, they latched onto the Vorthak cruiser's hull with magnetic clamps and began cutting through the armor, plating with industrial mining lasers. "They are trying to board us," the security officer reported with disbelief in his voice. "Human soldiers are cutting holes in our hull and entering the ship." Commander Throck stared at the tactical display, as if it showed impossible information. No species had ever attempted to board a Vorthak warship during battle. Their ships were designed to fight at long range with energy weapons and missiles. The idea of enemy soldiers running through the corridors was so unthinkable that they had minimal internal defenses. "Deploy security teams to repel boarders," Throck ordered. "How many humans have entered our ship?" "At least 200, sir. More are coming through new breaches every minute. They are moving in organized groups toward critical ship systems." Keth watched the security cameras as human soldiers ran through the Dominator's passages. They wore simple spacesuits and carried basic projectile weapons that should have been useless against Vorthak technology. But they moved with purpose and speed that suggested they knew exactly where they were going. A team led by a human named Cho reached the ship's power distribution center. Instead of trying to destroy the massive fusion reactors, which would have been impossible with their primitive weapons, they targeted the smaller control systems that regulated power flow. Their leader placed explosive charges on specific junction boxes, while his soldiers defended the position against Vorthak security forces. "How do they know which systems to attack?" Keth asked. "They are targeting components that even our own crew barely understands." The answer came from another boarding party that had reached the ship's computer core. A human female named Song connected a device to the Vorthak data systems, and began downloading information at incredible speed. Her equipment was crude but effective, copying decades of Vorthak technical knowledge in minutes. They have been planning this for a very long time, Keth realized. This is not a desperate defense. This is a carefully prepared attack. The humans fought through the ship's corridors with tactics that the Vorthak had never encountered. When they met superior numbers, they retreated through maintenance shafts and ventilation systems that Vorthak soldiers could not follow. When they faced heavily armed security teams, they used the ship's own structure against them, collapsing ceiling panels and redirecting atmosphere to create confusion. A human sergeant named Moon led his squad in an assault on the ship's weapon control center. Instead of charging the heavily defended position directly, they approached through the waste processing system. They emerged covered in filth but alive, catching the Vorthak defenders completely by surprise. Target acquired, Moon reported over his radio, beginning sabotage of primary weapon systems. His team worked with trained efficiency to disable the Dominator's main guns. They did not try to destroy the massive plasma cannons, which would have required heavy explosives they did not carry. Instead, they damaged the targeting computers and power relays that made the weapons usable. Within an hour, the pride of the Vorthak fleet was helpless. Its engines still worked and its life support continued to function, but it could not fight back effectively. The humans had turned the mighty warship into a floating metal shell. But the most disturbing part for Keth was not the tactical brilliance of the human attack. It was their attitude during the fighting. Vorthak security cameras recorded human soldiers laughing as they ran through exploding corridors. They made jokes over their communication systems while under fire. Some of them actually seemed to be enjoying the battle. "This is Corporal Jang," came one transmission. "I just took out a plasma turret with a wrench and some explosives. Anyone want to try to beat that?" "This is Private Yu," another voice replied. "I convinced a Vorthak computer to shut down half their life support by telling it the ship was on fire. Does that count?" They were competing with each other to see who could cause the most damage. They treated the invasion of a Vorthak warship like some kind of game. Even as their friends died around them, they maintained their sense of humor and determination. Commander Throck received an emergency communication from Vorthak High Command. The transmission was badly distorted because of damage to the ship's communication systems, but the message was clear. Reinforcements were being sent immediately. A full battle fleet under Admiral Kruk would arrive within days to finish the conquest of Earth. "Sir," Keth said quietly, "perhaps we should consider the possibility that these humans are more dangerous than our intelligence suggested." Throck turned to glare at him. "They are a primitive species using crude tactics born of desperation. When Admiral Kruk arrives with 50 battlecruisers, their resistance will collapse. No planet can stand against the full might of the Vorthak Empire." But even as he spoke those words, Throck's voice carried less certainty than usual. The humans had done something no other species had accomplished. They had captured a Vorthak warship. More importantly, they had shown that Vorthak technology and tactics were not invincible. The human boarding parties began withdrawing from the Dominator as their cargo ships detached from the hull. They had accomplished their mission and gathered the intelligence they came for. But before they left, their leader sent a message directly to the bridge. "This is Colonel Pak of the Earth Defense Force," the voice said in fluent Vorthak. "We are returning to our ships now. Thank you for the excellent training exercise. Your technology is impressive, but not as advanced as you believe. We look forward to meeting your reinforcements." Training exercise. The humans had treated the assault on the most powerful warship in the Vorthak fleet like practice for the real battle to come. They were not desperate defenders fighting for their lives. They were soldiers testing their weapons and tactics against an enemy they intended to defeat. As the human ships departed, Keth studied the damage reports from around the Dominator. The humans had been remarkably precise in their sabotage. They had disabled weapons and communication systems while leaving life support and engines mostly functional. It was as if they wanted the Vorthak crew to survive to report what had happened. "They want us to tell Admiral Kruk about this," Keth said with sudden understanding. "They want him to know exactly what they are capable of." The thought was deeply disturbing. Every species the Vorthak had conquered tried to hide their capabilities for as long as possible. They hoped to surprise the invaders with hidden weapons or secret defenses. The humans were doing the opposite. They were deliberately showing their strength to encourage a larger Vorthak response. Why would they want to face a bigger fleet? Keth wondered aloud. Over the next several hours, as repair teams worked to restore the Dominator's systems, Keth monitored human communications to try to understand their strategy. What he learned made the strange sensation in his mind grow stronger. The humans were mobilizing their entire planet for war. Every nation had put aside their conflicts to focus on the coming battle. Factories that had produced civilian goods were now making weapons and armor. Scientists were working around the clock to improve their technology using the data they had stolen from the Dominator. Most disturbing of all, human military leaders were talking about the Vorthak invasion as an opportunity rather than a threat. They saw the approaching fleet as a chance to test themselves against a worthy opponent. They were actually looking forward to fighting a battle they could not possibly win. A human general named Ryu gave a speech that was broadcast across their planet. "For too long, humanity has fought only itself," he said. "We have wasted our potential in petty conflicts between nations and ideologies. Now we face a true enemy that threatens our entire species. This is our chance to show the galaxy what humans can accomplish when we work together." The speech was met with cheers from human populations around the world. Instead of panic or despair, the approaching invasion had filled them with unity and purpose. They were preparing for the greatest battle in their history with excitement rather than fear. Keth felt the strange sensation in his mind grow stronger as he watched human preparations. Something was happening to his thought processes that he did not understand. For the first time in his life, he began to question whether the Vorthak would actually win the coming battle. The feeling was small, but persistent. A tiny voice in his mind suggesting that maybe, just maybe, these humans might find a way to surprise them again. The thought should have been impossible. The Vorthak Empire had never lost a war. Their technology was superior. Their numbers were overwhelming. Victory was inevitable. But as he watched the humans prepare for a battle they should have no hope of winning, Keth began to understand that inevitability might not be as certain as he had always believed. The sensation had a name, though Keth did not know it yet. The humans were teaching him to feel fear. Admiral Kruk arrived at the edge of the human solar system with the largest fleet the Vorthak Empire had ever assembled for a single conquest. 50 battle cruisers, 200 destroyers, and support ships carrying 1 million ground troops. The fleet stretched across space like a metal galaxy, its weapons powerful enough to turn entire worlds into lifeless rocks. Keth stood on the bridge of the flagship Devastator and watched the massive armada take formation. This was overwhelming force beyond anything the humans could possibly resist. Their primitive ships and crude weapons would be swept away like dust before a hurricane. But the strange sensation in his mind had grown stronger during the days since the Dominator's capture. Sleep periods were interrupted by dreams of human soldiers laughing as they fought impossible battles. During tactical planning sessions, unwanted thoughts about human capabilities interfered with his analysis. The fleet's medical officer had examined Keth and found nothing physically wrong. His genetic modifications were intact. His neural conditioning showed no signs of damage. Yet something was changing in his thought patterns that even advanced Vorthak science could not explain or Reverse Admiral Kruk was a legendary commander who had conquered more worlds than any other Vorthak in history. He was tall and broad even by their species standards, with scars from battles against the few enemies who had managed to wound him before being destroyed. His presence on the bridge radiated the confidence that came from 3 decades of unbroken victory. "Show me what these humans did to the Dominator," Kruk commanded as he reviewed the battle reports. Keth displayed the tactical data on the main screen. The boarding action, the precision sabotage, the theft of Vorthak technology, and most disturbing of all, the humans' apparent enjoyment of the entire battle. Every detail made the situation more puzzling rather than clearer. Kruk studied the information with the analytical mind that had made him the Empire's most successful admiral. "Interesting tactics," he said finally. "Crude but effective. These humans show some creativity for a primitive species. But creativity cannot overcome superior numbers and technology." The fleet moved deeper into the human solar system, expecting to meet scattered resistance from desperate defenders. Instead, they encountered something unprecedented in Vorthak military history. The humans met them at the edge of their own star system with every ship they could possibly gather. Thousands of vessels filled the space between planets. Military cruisers flew alongside converted cargo ships. Fighter squadrons mixed with civilian shuttles that had been fitted with weapons. Mining ships from the asteroid belt joined pleasure craft from the inner worlds. Every human vessel that could mount a weapon or carry troops had been pressed into service. "How many ships do they have?" Kruk asked as the tactical computers struggled to count the massive human fleet. "At least 8,000 vessels, sir," the sensor officer reported. "Possibly more. They are using everything from military destroyers to personal spacecraft. Some of their ships appear to be held together with improvised repairs and civilian equipment." It was an incredible sight. The humans had mobilized their entire civilization for this battle. But numbers alone meant nothing when the technology gap was so vast. A single Vorthak battlecruiser could destroy dozens of human ships before they could get close enough to use their primitive weapons. "Deploy the fleet in standard attack formation," Kruk ordered. "We will demonstrate why superior technology always defeats desperate courage." The Vorthak ships spread across space in the precise formations that had conquered 17 star systems. Heavy cruisers in the center with overlapping fields of fire. Destroyers on the flanks to prevent enemy ships from reaching the main force. Support vessels protected in the rear where they could coordinate the battle without being threatened. The humans responded with tactics that defied every principle of space warfare. Instead of forming organized battle lines, they attacked in massive swarms that had no apparent structure or coordination. Hundreds of ships converged on individual Vorthak vessels from multiple directions, accepting terrible losses to overwhelm their defenses. A human commander named Bayek led the first wave of attackers against the Vorthak left flank. His force consisted of 30 military vessels and over 200 converted civilian ships. Any rational commander would have kept his valuable military vessels safe and used the civilian ships only for support roles. Instead, Beck mixed military and civilian vessels together in his attack formation. Cargo ships armed with improvised weapons flew alongside purpose-built warships. Passenger liners converted into troop transports charged directly at Vorthak battlecruisers. Even small personal craft joined the assault, their pilots hoping to cause damage through ramming attacks if their weapons proved ineffective. "They are wasting their resources," Kruk observed as Vorthak plasma cannons tore through the human formation. "Those civilian ships have no chance of surviving in a real battle." But as the engagement continued, a disturbing pattern emerged. The civilian ships were not just being wasted. They were being used as distractions and shields to allow the military vessels to get closer to their targets. Human commanders were sacrificing their weakest ships to give their strongest ones better attack positions. More troubling was the effect this had on human morale. Instead of becoming demoralized by heavy losses, the surviving human crews seemed to fight harder when their comrades were killed. Radio communications intercepted from their ships revealed pilots and captains, encouraging each other to avenge their fallen friends. "This is Captain Shin of the Merchant. Vessel Lucky Star," came one transmission. "My ship is dead in space, but I'm going to ram the nearest Vorthak cruiser. Tell my crew they fought like heroes." The Lucky Star, little more than a cargo hauler with some missile pods bolted to its hull, accelerated directly toward the Vorthak destroyer Annihilator. Point defense weapons turned the civilian ship into a burning wreck, but its momentum carried the Hulk forward to crash into the destroyer's engine section. The impact damaged the Vorthak ship's propulsion systems and forced it to withdraw from the battle line. Similar sacrificial attacks were happening throughout the engagement. Human vessels too damaged to fight effectively were being used as guided missiles against Vorthak ships. Pilots who should have ejected to save their lives instead chose to die, if it meant inflicting damage on the enemy. Admiral Kruk watched these exchanges with growing puzzlement. "Their tactics make no sense," he said. "They are accepting massive casualties for minimal gains. Why do they continue fighting when they must know they cannot win?" Keth had been wondering the same thing. The humans were losing ships at a rate of 10 to 1. Their weapons barely scratched Vorthak armor. Their shields collapsed under the first hits from Vorthak energy beams. By every measure of military effectiveness, they should have surrendered hours ago, yet they kept fighting. More disturbing, they seemed to be learning from each engagement. Human tactics evolved during the battle, as commanders shared information about Vorthak weaknesses they discovered. Ships that had failed in earlier attacks were modified and sent back into battle with improved weapons and tactics. Squadron of human fighters led by Major Wu discovered that Vorthak ships had blind spots near their engine nacelles. Instead of attacking the heavily armored front sections, His pilots approached from behind and targeted the exhaust ports with concentrated missile strikes. 3 Vorthak destroyers lost power and had to be towed out of combat. Another human commander named So realized that Vorthak plasma cannons needed time to recharge between shots. She coordinated her attack waves to hit immediately after the enemy weapons fired, giving her ships precious seconds to close distance before the next volley. These innovations spread through the human fleet with remarkable speed. Information that one commander learned through costly trial and error was transmitted to other units within minutes. The entire human force adapted and improved its tactics in real time. They are sharing tactical data across their entire fleet, the intelligence officer reported. Every lesson learned by one unit is being applied by all others immediately. This was unprecedented in Vorthak experience. Most species fought with rigid command structures that made tactical adaptation slow and difficult. The humans seemed to operate more like a single organism than a traditional military force. When one part learned something useful, all parts benefited instantly. The battle raged for hours across the vast space between planets. Vorthak victory was never in doubt, but the cost was far higher than anyone had predicted. Human sacrifice attacks and improved tactics were taking a toll on the mighty fleet. Several Vorthak ships had been destroyed and many others damaged. Most disturbing for Keth was what he observed happening to his own thought processes during the battle. As he watched human pilots die in hopeless attacks against overwhelming odds, something in his mind responded in ways his conditioning should have prevented. When Captain Nam's fighter squadron was wiped out while protecting a damaged human cruiser, Keth felt what could only be described as sadness. When Commander Yu led a successful attack that destroyed a Vorthak destroyer, Keth experienced something like admiration for the human's tactical skill. These emotions should have been impossible. The space battle moved closer to Earth as the human fleet slowly gave ground before the advancing Vorthak armada. Despite their fierce resistance and clever tactics, the humans could not stop the superior alien technology from pushing them back toward their homeworld. But even in retreat, they continued to fight with the same determination. That had puzzled Keth from the beginning. Admiral Kruk ordered the fleet to enter Earth's orbital space and begin bombardment of military targets on the planet's surface. Standard procedure called for destroying the enemy's ability to resist before landing ground troops. A few demonstration strikes would show the humans that further resistance was hopeless. But as the Vorthak ships approached Earth, they discovered that the humans had transformed their entire world into a fortress. Every major city was protected by energy shields that had not existed during the initial reconnaissance. Weapon platforms hidden under the ocean's surface rose up to fire at the approaching fleet. Even civilian areas revealed defensive systems that had been cleverly disguised as ordinary buildings. How did they build all of this so quickly? Kruk demanded as his ships came under fire from the planet below. Our intelligence showed no significant planetary defenses just days ago. Keth studied the tactical displays with growing amazement. The humans had not just built new defenses. They had hidden existing ones so well that Vorthak sensors had completely missed them. Underground factories had been producing weapons and shields for months or even years. The entire planet had been preparing for this invasion long before the Vorthak arrived. "Sir," the intelligence officer reported, "we are detecting massive tunnel networks under every major population center. The humans appear to have been excavating and fortifying their world for an extended period. This level of preparation suggests they knew we were coming. The idea was impossible, but the evidence was undeniable. Somehow the humans had known about the Vorthak Empire and prepared accordingly. They had studied captured alien technology, built hidden defenses, and coordinated a planet-wide military response. This was not a desperate last stand by a surprised civilization. This was a carefully planned campaign by a species that had been expecting war. The orbital bombardment began with plasma strikes against obvious military targets. Vorthak weapons that could vaporize entire city blocks struck Earth's surface with devastating force. But instead of the expected destruction, the energy beams were absorbed or deflected by defensive systems the humans had somehow acquired. A human commander named Ju coordinated the planetary defense from a command center deep underground. His voice came over intercepted communications as he directed the placement of shield generators and weapon batteries, with the precision of someone who had rehearsed this battle many times before. Sector 7. Redirect power from the backup shields to reinforce the primary grid, Ju ordered. Sector 12, target the Vorthak cruiser at grid reference Alpha 9er. Wait for my signal, then hit them with everything we have. The coordinated response from Earth's surface caught the Vorthak fleet by surprise. Instead of random defensive fire from scattered installations, they faced organized resistance that seemed to anticipate their every move. Human weapons targeted Vorthak ships with accuracy that suggested detailed knowledge of their capabilities and weaknesses. More concerning was the effectiveness of human defensive technology. Their shields should not have been able to stop Vorthak plasma bombardment, but somehow they were holding. Their weapons should not have been able to penetrate Vorthak armor, but several ships reported hull breaches from surface-based attacks. They have modified our own technology, Keth realized as he analyzed the defensive systems. Those shields are based on Vorthak designs but improved in ways we never considered. Their weapons are using our power systems but with human modifications that make them more effective. Admiral Krook's face darkened as he absorbed this information. The humans had not just stolen Vorthak technology during their raid on the Dominator. They had improved it. A species that had achieved faster than light, travel only decades ago was somehow enhancing designs that the Vorthak had perfected over centuries. The ground invasion began with 1 million Vorthak troops landing at strategic points around the planet. Their advanced armor and weapons should have allowed them to overwhelm human defenders quickly. Instead, they found themselves fighting an enemy that seemed to know exactly how Vorthak forces operated. Human resistance fighters led by a commander named Gang used tunnel systems to appear behind Vorthak positions and disappear before retaliation could arrive. They targeted Vorthak supply lines with precision strikes that disabled vehicles and communication equipment. Most disturbing, they used captured Vorthak weapons with skill that suggested extensive training. How do they know our operational procedures so well? The ground force commander reported to the fleet. Every time we establish a defensive position, they attack our weak points. Every time we advance, they retreat to prepared positions that give them tactical advantages. It is as if they have our training manuals. Keth felt the strange sensation in his mind growing stronger as he monitored the ground campaign. The humans were not just fighting desperately to defend their homes. They were executing a sophisticated military strategy that treated the Vorthak invasion as a problem to be solved, rather than a disaster to be endured. A human soldier named Rim led a squad that captured an entire Vorthak supply depot using nothing but improvised explosives and detailed knowledge of Vorthak security protocols. Her team moved through the facility like they had studied its layout for months, disabling guards and seizing equipment with professional efficiency. Another human, a young female named Ha, coordinated civilian evacuations while simultaneously directing military strikes against Vorthak positions. She managed logistics for millions of refugees while planning ambush attacks that destroyed Vorthak vehicles and captured their crews for interrogation. The humans were treating the invasion of their homeworld like a complex engineering project. They analyzed Vorthak tactics, identified weaknesses, developed countermeasures, and implemented solutions with the same methodical approach they might use to build a bridge or design a spacecraft. Most disturbing was their attitude toward casualties. Human soldiers died in large numbers during the fighting, but their deaths seemed to strengthen rather than weaken the overall resistance. Each fallen defender provided information about Vorthak capabilities that was immediately shared with other units. Every sacrifice contributed to the growing human understanding of how to fight their invaders effectively. Keth observed this phenomenon with fascination and something approaching dread. The sensation in his mind had a name now, though he still did not fully understand it. He was experiencing fear, not the simple survival instinct that drove prey animals to flee from predators, but a more complex emotion that recognized genuine threat from an unexpected source. The humans were dangerous not because they were strong or well-armed, but because they refused to accept defeat. They learned from every engagement, adapted to every new situation, and improved their capabilities constantly. Most frightening of all, they seemed to grow more determined as their situation became more desperate. During a particularly fierce battle for control of a major city, Keth watched human defenders make stands that defied all military logic. A group of soldiers led by Sergeant Dahl held a strategic bridge against an entire Vorthak battalion for 6 hours, accepting certain death to delay the alien advance. Their sacrifice allowed civilian evacuations to continue and gave other human units time to prepare defensive positions. But instead of mourning their fallen comrades, the surviving humans used Dal's example to inspire even greater resistance. His name became a battle cry that spread through human communication networks. Soldiers who had never met him fought harder because of his sacrifice. "They are turning their casualties into weapons," Keth observed with growing unease. "Every death strengthens their resolve instead of weakening it." Admiral Crook was beginning to show signs of frustration as the conquest of Earth proved far more difficult than anticipated. Vorthak forces controlled key installations and major cities, but human resistance continued from hidden bases and underground networks. The planet was technically conquered but not truly defeated. How long can they maintain this level of resistance? Crook asked during a strategy meeting with his senior officers. "Indefinitely, sir," the intelligence officer replied reluctantly. "They have prepared for a long campaign. Their supply networks are hidden and distributed. Their command structure continues to function even when we capture their leaders. Most concerning, their morale actually seems to improve under pressure." Keth felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's environmental systems. The humans were not just resisting conquest. They were demonstrating that conquest itself might be impossible when facing a species that refused to surrender. For the first time in Vorthak military history, victory was not assured. The mighty empire that had never lost a war was discovering that some enemies could not be defeated by superior technology and overwhelming force. The humans were teaching them about something more powerful than weapons or numbers. They were showing the galaxy what happened when an eon. The war for Earth dragged on for months longer than any Vorthak conquest in recorded history. What should have been a swift victory had become a grinding campaign that consumed resources and lives at an alarming rate. Admiral Crook found himself requesting additional reinforcements for the third time, something that had never happened in previous invasions. Keth spent his days analyzing human resistance patterns and his nights experiencing dreams that should have been impossible for his genetically modified mind. The strange new emotion he had learned to call fear was changing him in ways that Vorthak science could not explain or reverse. More disturbing, other crew members were beginning to show similar symptoms. The ship's medical officer reported that nearly 20% of the fleet personnel were experiencing what he carefully termed psychological irregularities. Sleep disorders, anxiety about combat outcomes, and persistent worry about mission failure were spreading through the Vorthak forces like a disease. The humans were somehow infecting their enemies with emotions that had been bred out of Vorthak genetics centuries ago. Human resistance had evolved from desperate defense to sophisticated guerrilla warfare that made occupation nearly impossible. A network of underground cities connected by tunnel systems allowed human forces to move unseen across continents. They struck at Vorthak supply lines, communication centers, and isolated outposts before disappearing back into their hidden bases. A human leader named one coordinated resistance activities across an entire continent, from a mobile command center that Vorthak forces could never locate. Her network included everyone from former military officers to civilian volunteers who provided intelligence and supplies. She had turned the conquest of Earth into a nightmare of constant ambushes and sabotage attacks. Another human commander called Oak specialized in what they termed psychological warfare. His teams broadcast messages that reached Vorthak communication systems despite all attempts to block them. The content was disturbing not because it threatened violence, but because it questioned the fundamental assumptions of Vorthak superiority. "You came here expecting easy victory," one message said in perfect Vorthak language. "You believed your technology made you invincible, but you are learning that machines cannot defeat the human spirit. How many of your soldiers are beginning to doubt? How many are asking whether this war is worth fighting?" The messages had an effect that worried Keth deeply. Vorthak troops were indeed beginning to question their mission. Soldiers who had never experienced doubt were asking their officers why the conquest was taking so long. Veterans of successful campaigns were reporting nightmares about human resistance fighters who refused to stay dead. The breaking point came during a major offensive to capture the human capital city. Admiral Crook committed half his remaining forces to an assault that should have ended organized resistance once and for all. The attack was planned with typical Vorthak precision, using overwhelming firepower to break through human defenses and capture their primary command centers. The humans met the assault with tactics that defied every principle of military science. Instead of defending static positions, they allowed Vorthak forces to advance deep into the city, before launching coordinated attacks from all directions. Every building had been prepared as a fortress. Every street intersection was a potential ambush site. Civilians joined military units in defending their homes with weapons ranging from captured Vorthak equipment to improvised explosives. A human general named Pyo led the defense from a command post that moved constantly to avoid Vorthak targeting systems. His forces used the city's infrastructure against the invaders, collapsing tunnels to trap Vorthak vehicles and redirecting power systems to disable alien equipment. The urban environment that should have favored the technologically superior Vorthak became a maze of death traps and killing zones, but the most devastating aspect of the human defense was not their tactical skill or technological adaptations. It was their absolute refusal to surrender even when defeat was certain. Vorthak forces captured building after building, block after block, only to discover that human resistance simply moved to new positions and continued fighting. Keth watched the battle unfold from orbital sensors and felt the emotion he now recognized as fear grow stronger with each passing hour. The humans were losing. Their casualties were enormous. Their defenses were being overwhelmed. Yet they kept fighting with the same determination they had shown at the beginning of the war. A human soldier named Bay held a strategic intersection with just 12 defenders against an entire Vorthak company. His position was hopeless and his weapons were running out of ammunition, but he continued directing fire and coordinating with other units as if victory was still possible. "This is Bay to all units." His voice came over intercepted communications. "We are surrounded and taking heavy casualties, but the enemy advance has been stopped. Recommend artillery strike on our position to prevent Vorthak breakthrough." He was calling for human artillery to fire on his own location. The man was willing to die along with his entire squad to prevent Vorthak forces from advancing. This level of sacrifice went beyond military duty into something that Keth struggled to understand. The artillery strike came as requested, destroying Bay's position and killing everyone there, human and Vorthak alike. But the sacrifice achieved its purpose. The Vorthak advance was stopped, and other human units used the delay to establish new defensive lines. Similar acts of heroism and sacrifice occurred throughout the battle. Human medics ran through enemy fire to treat wounded soldiers. Engineers destroyed their own infrastructure to deny it to Vorthak forces. Civilians volunteered for suicide missions against alien positions when military personnel were not available. The effect on Vorthak morale was devastating. Soldiers who had conquered 17 star systems were shaken by an enemy that would rather die than surrender. The fear that Keth had been experiencing spread through the ranks like a plague, affecting decision-making and combat effectiveness. Admiral Kruk himself began showing signs of the psychological contamination. His usual confidence was replaced by constant analysis of failure scenarios. He requested intelligence updates every hour instead of relying on daily reports. Most disturbing, he began asking questions about whether the conquest was actually achievable. "How do you defeat an enemy that considers death preferable to defeat?" Kruk asked during a strategy meeting. "How do you occupy a population that sees every casualty as inspiration for greater resistance?" The questions had no good answers. Vorthak military doctrine was based on the assumption that all rational beings would surrender when faced with overwhelming force. The humans had proven that assumption wrong by refusing to be rational. They fought not because they could win, but because they believed their cause was worth any sacrifice. After 6 months of grinding warfare that consumed enormous resources and achieved limited objectives, Admiral Kruk made the decision that would change Vorthak history forever. He ordered the withdrawal of all Imperial forces from Earth. The official reason given to Vorthak High Command was resource allocation priorities. The conquest was taking too long and costing too much for the strategic value gained. Other targets offered better opportunities for Imperial expansion. The real reason was simpler and more disturbing. The humans had taught the Vorthak to feel fear, and once learned that emotion could not be forgotten. Too many Vorthak soldiers were questioning the morality and necessity of conquest. Too many officers were reporting doubts about Imperial superiority. The withdrawal began under cover of a massive orbital bombardment designed to convince the humans that they had won through Vorthak mercy rather than human resistance. But everyone involved knew the truth. For the first time in Imperial history, the Vorthak military was retreating from an enemy they could not defeat. Keth stood on the bridge of the Devastator as the fleet prepared to leave Earth's solar system. Below them, the blue and white planet continued to spin peacefully, its surface scarred by months of warfare but its people unbowed. The humans had achieved something no other species in the galaxy had accomplished. They had forced the Vorthak Empire to abandon a conquest. As the fleet engaged its faster-than-light drives and fled toward safer territory, Keth realized that his transformation was complete. The emotion the humans had taught him would never leave. Fear was now a permanent part of his consciousness, along with other feelings that his species had abandoned generations ago. But along with fear had come something else, an understanding that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act in spite of it. The humans had shown him that true strength came not from superior technology or genetic modification, but from the willingness to fight for something greater than oneself. The Vorthak Empire would never be the same. Too many of its soldiers had learned what Keth had learned. The age of easy conquest was over, ended by a species that refused to accept defeat and taught their enemies the meaning of fear. Years passed after the withdrawal from Earth, but the effects of that failed conquest continued to spread through the Vorthak Empire, like ripples from a stone thrown into still water. Keth found himself assigned to non-combat duties, officially due to his expertise in analyzing unusual enemy behavior, but really because his psychological condition made him unfit for frontline service. The medical classification was called post-human contact syndrome, a term that would have been meaningless before the Earth campaign. Hundreds of Vorthak veterans showed similar symptoms. They experienced emotions that their species had eliminated through genetic engineering. They questioned orders that had once seemed obviously correct. Most disturbing of all, they spoke about concepts like honor, sacrifice, and fighting for principles rather than simple conquest. Keth spent his time in the intelligence division, studying reports from the frontier regions where Vorthak expansion had slowed dramatically. Other species throughout the galaxy had somehow learned about the human resistance. Word was spreading that the mighty Vorthak Empire could be defeated by beings willing to pay any price for freedom. The Kalari, who had surrendered without fighting just years before, began showing signs of renewed resistance to Vorthak occupation. Their crystal cities, once symbols of submission, became centers of underground activity that echoed human tactics. Small acts of sabotage and defiance spread across their world like a growing flame. The Zarian warriors, defeated but not destroyed, started organizing themselves into guerrilla units that struck at Vorthak installations before disappearing into their mountainous homelands. They had learned from intercepted human communications that defeat in open battle did not mean the war was over. Even the gaseous Nethrim, whose fear-driven surrender had been total and immediate, began coordinating resistance activities from their floating cities. They used their natural ability to move through dense atmosphere to attack Vorthak facilities and then vanish into the clouds where alien technology could not follow. It is as if the entire galaxy has been infected with human defiance, reported General Vex during a security briefing that Keith attended. Species that accepted Vorthak rule for years are suddenly questioning our authority and organizing resistance movements. The truth was more complex and more disturbing than simple imitation of human tactics. The humans had proven that resistance was possible, but more importantly, they had shown other species that the Vorthak were not invincible. Fear of imperial retribution had kept conquered worlds submissive. Once that fear was broken by human example, the foundation of Vorthak control began to crumble. High Command responded by declaring human space permanently off-limits to all imperial vessels. Contact with humans or their technology was forbidden. Any Vorthak citizen who showed signs of post-human contact syndrome was removed from military service and assigned to civilian duties where their condition could not spread to others, but the damage was already done. The psychological contagion had reached the highest levels of imperial leadership. Emperor Zorth himself was reported to suffer from disturbing dreams about human resistance fighters who refused to die. The being who had ruled the galaxy's most powerful empire for decades was experiencing doubt for the first time in his long life. Keth received a new assignment that reflected both his expertise and his contaminated psychological state. He was tasked with developing defensive strategies to protect the empire from future human expansion. The irony was not lost on him. The Vorthak, who had never needed to defend themselves from conquered species, were now planning for the possibility of human retaliation. The work required him to study human capabilities in detail, which only intensified his condition. The more he learned about human history and culture, the more he understood why they had fought so effectively against impossible odds. They had spent their entire evolutionary history fighting each other, developing tactics and strategies through constant warfare. When faced with external enemies, they simply applied their hard-won knowledge to a new opponent. But understanding human tactical evolution was only part of the puzzle. The deeper mystery was their motivation. Why did beings fight harder when their situation became more desperate? Why did casualties strengthen rather than weaken their resolve? Why did they consider death preferable to surrender? The answer came from studying human literature and philosophy, cultural elements that Vorthak intelligence had previously ignored as irrelevant to military analysis. Humans possessed concepts that the Vorthak had never developed or had deliberately eliminated from their society. They believed in ideals worth dying for. They valued individual freedom over collective security. They saw themselves as responsible not just for their own survival, but for the welfare of future generations. Most alien of all, they considered courage in the face of certain defeat to be more honorable than victory through superior force. These concepts were so foreign to Vorthak thinking that they might as well have been advanced physics. Yet they explained everything about human behavior during the war. The humans had not been fighting to win. They had been fighting to prove that their values were stronger than Vorthak technology. Keth's reports on human psychology became required reading throughout the imperial military. His analysis helped explain why conquest had failed and why other species were beginning to emulate human resistance. But the reports also had an unintended effect. They spread human ideas through Vorthak society like a philosophical virus. Young Vorthak officers began asking questions about the morality of conquest. Soldiers wondered whether their empire's expansion was justified if it required destroying species that valued freedom. Even civilians started questioning whether genetic modification and social conditioning had made them stronger or simply more compliant. The transformation was slow but irreversible. The Vorthak Empire that had once spread across the galaxy through relentless expansion began to turn inward, focusing on consolidating existing territory rather than conquering new worlds. The age of imperial growth was ending, replaced by an era of doubt and self-examination. Keth eventually retired from military service and became a teacher at the Imperial Academy, where he educated new generations of Vorthak about the psychological aspects of warfare. His courses on enemy motivation and resistance psychology were among the most popular at the institution. But his real purpose was different than official curriculum suggested. Through careful analysis of historical conflicts and case studies of failed conquests, he taught young Vorthak to think about war in human terms. He showed them that victory was not always possible, and that some enemies could not be defeated by force alone. The humans had given him fear, but they had also given him wisdom. The emotion that should have weakened him had instead opened his mind to possibilities his species had never considered. Fear of failure made him more careful in planning. Fear of casualties made him value life more highly. Fear of moral judgment made him question the justice of his actions. As he stood before his students and explained how a primitive species had forced the mighty Vorthak Empire to retreat, Keth realized that the humans had achieved their greatest victory not through military force but through example. They had shown the galaxy that resistance was possible, and that some things were worth any sacrifice to preserve. The fear they had taught him was not weakness, but strength. It was the beginning of wisdom, the foundation of courage and the source of honor. The humans had not just defended their world. They had changed their enemies into something better than they had been before. In teaching the Vorthak to feel fear, the humans had also taught them to be brave. That was perhaps the most human gift of all. The understanding that true courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to do what was right despite being afraid. The galaxy would never be the same. The age of easy conquest was over, ended by a species that refused to surrender and taught their enemies that some victories were worth more than survival itself. The humans had won not just their war but the peace that followed, by transforming the very nature of conflict throughout the known universe. Keth closed his eyes and remembered the blue and white world where he had first learned to fear, and in learning fear, had discovered what it meant to be truly alive. It was only with humans that he had first understood fear, but it was also only with humans that he had learned fear could be overcome. The lesson would echo through the galaxy for generations to come, a testament to the power of courage over technology and spirit over force. The humans had taught the universe that some things could not be conquered, only earned through respect and understanding. In the end, that was the most human victory of all.